growth, with questions still remaining, quite a lot of questions, or at least one very big question about where precisely the growth is going to come from.
And looking at this, it does seem very clear that the only thing that really seems like it's going to create that growth is these changes to the planning laws, to housing, to being able to build more infrastructure in places that we really need it. That's the only thing that I can see in this plan.
I suppose the
English
devolution bill as well, that would a bit in the
potentially, but I think it's hard to gauge the success of that growth when we just don't know what the people who are in charge of the metro mayors, council leaders, we don't know what their priority is going to be. Or B, James, if they're going to even have the money to actually do the things that they're going to get the powers to do. We know local councils are already cash strapped anyway. So whether they're going to be able to afford to do any of the things that might create the growth is another question. A few things that we weren't expecting. The ban on conversion therapy. I think it was mooted in a paper, I think, a couple of days ago that was potentially going to be brought back. That's going to be confirmed.
Supposed to have been in the last two monarch speeches, that, and then mysteriously wasn't.
Yeah, yes. There was a big row about it last time, but that's now being brought back. They're quite keen to say it will not cover psychological support, treatment and counselling, which is exactly the whole row that Kemi Badenoch had in government about whether conversion therapy might work or not. So we are now confirming that's going to be back.
This is teaching people to have different sexual feelings. People teach conversional therapy in the context of sexuality and gender, or just sexuality?
I think it's both sexuality and gender.
So the idea that you get sent to a camp where you'll be trained out of whatever position you were in when you arrived.
Exactly. And I think, that's long been something that politicians want to crack down on. Everybody agrees across the board that these practices are wrong, but what they don't want in terms of any new laws to capture is counselling services, experts, the people that might be on hand to help
you come to terms
with what's going on,
okay.
Feelings around it, and obviously the psychological support and help that obviously everybody understands is necessary, but there are real fears that they may get caught up in some form of this legislation. So that's going to be brought back. I think that will please quite a lot lot of people, but for the government, it's another headache down the line. This is something that the last government just thought, we just don't know how to navigate this.
Let's not bother. Well, again, you know, it's they're grasping the nettle. The appetite for getting things done or getting on with things always opens the door to the possibility of things going wrong. The only way you can ensure that nothing goes wrong is by doing nothing, and even then, it's not guaranteed. The House of Lords, you mentioned very cleverly that the problem of overcrowding may be solved shortly by House of Lords reform. That was there. He will remove the right of hereditary peers to sit and vote in the Lords.
Yes. There's no note of that peers' retirement age in that specific bit of the King's speech, but we are expecting that at some point to happen. He's also going to put a retirement age of 80 on. It's hinted that will be the first step in reforming the House of Lords. But yes, the first step, they're saying, removing the right for those hereditary peers to sit in the House of Lords to try and cut down the numbers. Keir Starmer said last week when we were on the way to NATO that he thinks that only the Chinese have a bigger upper chamber than we do.
Really?
Yes, he sort of laughed as he said it. So he's very keen to continue with that. Another thing not in it, votes at 16. We were widely expecting this to be in the King's speech. Various other journalists as well had also noted that they expected this to be in the King's speech. Clearly, Keir Starmer is trying to focus on that growth.
Well, he said something about extending democratic engagement.
He did. He said, my ministers will strengthen the integrity of elections and encourage wide participation in the democratic process.
Oh, no, that doesn't you couldn't claim that was smuggling in votes for 16-year-olds.
It feels like that would be the natural place to put it if you were going to do it, but it's not noted at all. So I'm sure there will be some people who will be upset that that's not included, but equally, this government will carry on for 5 years. They've got to leave something for years 2, 3 and 4. Is that right?
Tell us more about what this new duty of candour for public servants is all about.
So it's a so-called Hillsborough law.
Yes.
So, you know, the Labour Party rather have been promising this for years. Essentially, they want to put a duty on public servants to take part in things like public inquiries, to force them to attend. It will also, they say, help improve transparency and accountability. They also mentioned the infected blood inquiry as well as the Hillsborough case. So just trying to essentially strengthen public safeguards to make sure that there is a duty of candour for them, a legal duty on public servants and authorities to report wrongdoing, to take part in any inquiries, and to make sure things like this just do not get covered up ever again.
And so it will involve consequences.
What will it involve consequences
if you give if it is concluded that you knowingly gave false information?
I don't think that's not something that's specifically mentioned in this.
Right.
It's not something specifically mentioned in the King's Speech legislation. I just think it will give them new powers, and it will give inquiries potentially new powers to call forward the witnesses to give evidence. But I don't think there's an element of punishment if you do not take part.
Ukraine support remains in place, and we wondered, didn't we, whether or not the statement of a commitment to an independent sovereign Palestinian state marked a departure from previous speeches. But actually, the Queen said almost exactly the same words in 2010, delivering David Cameron's legislative agenda. It's
not something that usually gets mentioned, especially, like I say, 14 years since we've mentioned that in a King's speech. So the King said the government is committed to a two-state solution with a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable and sovereign Palestinian state. So no word of any sort of peace process, no word of any recognition of a Palestinian state, but obviously still committed. Like I say, that was the last government's position as well, a two-state solution. But writing it in the King's speech, I think, will be a bit of a step forward, a bit of a moment for some people.
And detail, as you say, lacking on the big issue of housing. Some reports already that housing companies or property firms, the housing sector, wondering how they're going to deliver 1.5 million extra houses in this Parliament alone, plus more social and affordable homes. I don't know how much detail they could have delivered on today, but they could certainly have delivered a little more than they have, is the early response of the housing sector itself.
I think that's fair. Like, reading this planning and infrastructure bill, it's very light on the detail. It's talking about reforming compulsory purchase compensation rules so that compensation is paid to landowners. It's talking about streamlining the delivery process so that these critical infrastructure can be built, so that more homes can be built. Talks about increasing local planning authorities' capacity, improving decision making, but it's all very wishy-washy and vague about exactly how they're going to create all of these new homes. And also, it just does create a lot more problems as well. We were talking earlier about the idea of capacity in terms of the labour workforce. We had a caller on this morning talking about how they just don't think there's the builders enough in the country to build all these new homes either.
The plural of anecdote is not data, but certainly in West London at the moment, good builders are as rare as hen's teeth. I don't know where you're going to find enough to build 1.5 million new homes. No shortage of detail on the VAT for private school fees policy. That's toast. The exemption from VAT for private school fees will shortly be history.
Yes, indeed. And obviously this is important because it's going to pay for all the things that Labour say they want to introduce that actually cost money, things like the breakfast schools and various other policies that Labour have promised. They've got to find some way to raise that money, and VAT on private schools is going to come forward. That is confirmed. It will be in one of the upcoming finance bills, so we're unlikely to see it probably implemented anytime soon. It's not going to be immediate, which will probably give some slight relief to some people planning for the next year of their school education, but it will be at some point raking in a fair bit of money for the Treasury.
And as we discussed earlier, the nationalisation of railways, Great British Railways will be the names. It's going for a lot of Great British.
They love it. Great British Energy.
Bake Off has a lot to answer for, doesn't it? It's now influencing the nomenclature of Keir Starmer's legislative programme. That will involve waiting for franchises to expire and then not allowing the private sector to...
And also making it the default as well for any potential new firms that come on the horizon or anything happens to them. They say that it'll save a lot of money. TBC, I think whether it will save taxpayers money, but they seem to think it will. And it brings back to the question of accountability. If the public are seeing all of these things being taken back into state ownership, they kind of want to see something for it. Otherwise, I think a lot of people will go, actually, what's the point in this?
It has to get better. If it gets better, that's all. And if they manage to hire 6,500 new teachers with the money raised by putting VAT on school fees, but people may feel the impact of that. Others may feel that it barely touches the side. What's the phone in here? What do you pick as the phone in out of all of the stuff that we've just seen?
Is this the most left-wing manifesto left-wing King's speech we've seen in a generation?
That's not a lot of left-wingism. Well, I suppose renationalisation.
Are you joking? Nationalisation, workers' rights,
it's a bit
abolishing
vague
hereditary peers.
I want detail. I want experience. I want evidence. I like the housing stuff.
How
feasible is it that they can build 1.5? I mean, literally, how feasible? If you can't get a plasterer right now, how do you respond to the news that Keir Starmer's going to build 1.5 million houses in 5 years.
Yep, and again, similar to what the Tories promised as well, but, we haven't hit our target for 300,000 homes a year for a long time, not since before COVID, I believe. Those housing targets not been met. But yes, I think the planning target will definitely be upsetting for some people to hear that they will lose their rights to complain.
It's a good job we didn't get rid of hundreds of thousands of skilled workers in the construction industry by abolishing freedom of movement. That would have been a really silly thing to do.